Today's impeachment news doesn't get him down. There was a major legal blow today for Donald Trump where he's sure to feel it. A federal appeals court in Manhattan ruled that his tax returns must be turned over to the district attorney. It's all part of that hush money case, the one involving payments to porn star Stormy Daniels and Playboy playmate Karen McDougal before the 2016 election. And experts agree that it's almost certainly headed to the Supreme Court. Today's verdict is a reminder that while the impeachment process is undoubtedly an existential threat to Trump's presidency, it's not the only fire in need of a containment strategy. In fact, if Democrats decided to just drop the whole impeachment inquiry tomorrow, Trump would still be buried under a mountain of ongoing litigation. Politico writes it like this, quote, Trump could face court rulings that say he is illegally profiting from foreign governments, that he must hand over his tax returns, and that lawmakers should see more of Robert Mueller's Russia probe evidence. He may even get hit with Supreme Court decisions that rebuff his administration's bold claims of presidential immunity from prosecution and congressional investigations. Ron, Harry, and the table are back. Ron, let me start with you. This idea that there's so much, we're here every day. We have an hour to sift through the papers. This seems to be where the Democrats have historically been tripped up at just the volume of corruption. What do you think about this ruling on taxes, and what, if anything, should Democrats do with it?
Well, look, we're going to face a test. We talked in the last segment about Trump corrupting our foreign policy and trying to corrupt the Foreign Service. Now we're going to see if Trump has corrupted the federal judiciary. And this is, been a program for President Trump. He's going to hold an event at the White House this week to celebrate his record-setting pace of filling federal judgeships. And now 2 of those people he put on the Supreme Court are going to have to rule on whether or not the Second Circuit's decision today is correct, whether or not Donald Trump's going to have to turn over his tax returns. So a great American institution, the independence of our judiciary, is on the line here. The Supreme Court said no to President Nixon. It said no to President Clinton and forced him to give testimony in the Paul Jones case. And now we're going to see if the Supreme Court will stand up to Donald Trump. That is the test that's coming.
It also, Karine, not that the Democrats need any advice from me or any more motivation for 2020, but it would seem that if the Democrats can mount sort of a parallel effort around the courts and their importance, this might be an example.
Absolutely, because I think that the question always to me is, what is he hiding and why? What is so scandalous in his tax returns? What is so dangerous that he doesn't want the American public to see? And this is behooves Democrats to continue to pound and get them, because it may answer some national security questions, right? It may answer some conflicts of interest questions that we just don't know. It really, to me, it ties back in to this whole Ukraine and the foreign policy, how broken it is under Donald Trump. I think I'm wondering if there's a connection there, because he is going over and beyond to protect his taxes.
It also, Harry Litman, ties back to another easy-to-understand Trump scandal. Had sex with a porn star, wrote checks to keep her quiet in the Oval Office, full stop.
Full stop, and that's, of course, where Vance is going. Look, I agree with Ron. It's really going to be a test of where the Supreme Court is, but I think the test will come earlier. I know everyone thinks it's going to the Supreme Court. It is a really simple case. He was dead wrong, and he had to know he was going to lose when at oral argument the judge asked his lawyer, so you mean if he shoots somebody on Fifth Avenue, nobody can do anything? That's correct, Your Honor. So if the decision, which was so straightforward, even is accepted for Supreme Court review, that's an indication that 4 members, probably 5, are ready to reverse it. And that, to me, would already be really foreboding. My best guess, actually, against the grain here is that they won't take the case.
It is an interesting reminder of scandals past. And because I think I said already, we lived dog years. I mean, he was an unindicted co-conspirator, so said the Southern District of New York in December of 2018. We're about 3 or 4 scandals later, but none of these chapters serve him politically.
No, and any one of these could create additional momentum for what Democrats are doing on the Hill. It may be this.
And swing public support
Sure.
to the point where you bring around.
And look, if the courts rule that Kupperman has to testify, this is going to be a watershed case that may say then Bolton has to testify, Eisenberg, all these others. Then if you're saying no, you're obstructing not just the Congress, but you're disobeying the courts. This week, in a nutshell, is a perfect example of why many people are concerned the president is trying to position himself above the law. And here's why. He's saying to the United States Congress, I have constitutional immunity. I don't have to talk to you. And he's saying to the courts, I don't have to do what you tell me to either. This is the danger of the executive authority that Donald Trump and Bill Barr are trying to put out there, that the president doesn't have to answer to the Congress or the judiciary. That is exactly anathema to what the founders embedded in our Constitution. That is why we broke from a crown, because we wanted a president, a chief executive, to be held accountable both by the Congress and by the judiciary. Donald Trump saying, no, I'm not. And that's the danger we're watching play out in real time.
Harry, I'm very aware of sort of false hope, mostly as the mother of a 7-year-old. We don't we don't have false expectations of new Legos after homework is done. But is it a false hope to think that we'll ever see the taxes that Karine said could tell us a lot about where his money comes from?
No, I think it's a real hope. If Vance gets it, which I think he will, that doesn't mean it gets revealed right away. But you have to imagine, that it will come out. I think, everything that David says is right. And I just want to make one point about Bill Barr and the Justice Department. In past investigations, there's been another cop on the beat to really come in if people are acting illegally, like arguably Eisenberg here. But here they have impunity. The only thing there is Congress or the courts. There's no Jaworski or Cox or Starr or Mueller, and that's what's really emboldened them. But on your point, I think the day will come. And by the way, I think Trump will be a repeat litigant and under siege in the courts for the rest of his life, not simply his presidency.
I think you're right. I've heard the same thing from some of his closest friends and allies.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.